All right, welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shauna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, how are things? I'm
hmm
almost afraid to ask that question because you know the damage report comes every morning, but how are things for you?
hanging in there by a thread here, and it looks like we've got some gale force winds coming on, and my lights are flickering on and off, and I feel like that is just a symbol of how I'm feeling right now.
Exactly. It's like, okay, the irony of that. But yeah, we're
Uh-huh.
gonna we're gonna hold on though during these gale force winds. We're gonna hold on for sure. But Dr. Lisa, let's get into today.
hmm
We have huge, whopping phases that we
Yep.
need to
Yep,
talk
we
about today.
do.
So, folks that are expecting to hear a word of the week, yeah, it might happen organically, but we have not planned one because we've got a lot to cover today. So, given that, we're going to jump
hmm
right into phase one. I'm just going to offer to folks if you hear a word that you want to be a future word of the week in all the things that we're about to share with you, email us info@unfazedpodcast.com. That's what you do. Okay, you email us and let us know if we're not clear because we got a lot to cover today. But Dr. Lisa, let me thank you for sending me a message because I almost forgot that the Oscars were coming on. So, with that, I think that's an appropriate phase one where to start because you and I have been well documented talking about problematic Oscars prior to this year, where, yeah, it was quite clear that it was the hashtag Oscars so white issue, where, of course, you can't have people of color win if they are not nominated. Hello. And so that's where we were a couple of years ago for decades. And now we're starting to see a bit more equity that's been a long time coming. And so, Lisa, I got to watch big portions of the award show, and then I researched everything else after the fact that I missed. And there's some highlights. We should talk about some of these highlights here. I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit based on what I saw because that's exactly how I experienced it. But Lisa, I know that you specifically saw Wicked. I saw Wicked on Broadway and then saw it in the movie theater with my sons, and then they saw it again and so forth. And so it was just very fitting that they opened up with Wicked. But
Yep. Yep.
hello, we
hmm
have a lot that went into that, including some award winners. We have Wicked winning the best costume design by the first Black man to win in
hmm
this category, which was super cool because I had been following Ruth Carter for a while. She is a Hampton University alumni, HBCU alumni, and was the first Black woman to win. And I believe she was the first Black person, period, to win the award in 2023 for Black Panther. And so to see Paul Tazwell follow that up as the first Black man was just super cool. But again, too, Lisa, I almost have to look at it the glass half full, glass half empty situation where I'm waiting for the days that we no longer have first because these experiences and accolades are so regular that we don't have to call them first anymore.
Right. Right.
Um, but we're very happy. We're very happy about that. Um,
hmm
Also, too, I'm just going to highlight, Lisa, some of the more profound nominees and winners that really struck a chord with me because it was so much. Sugar Cane was one that I've been following for a while because, Lisa, you know how much I love documentaries. I mean, that's just my thing. I think that's my genre. And so that film was specifically looking at Canadian Indian residential school systems where basically they were trying to braid together the stories of survivors and descendants
hmm
of those schools in such a way that once again they're filling in some of the history that consistently systemically gets left out. And so every article that I read, all the research, all the YouTubes that I looked at was specifically talking about just how historic it was for the documentary to even exist. Because for everybody that says they want to avoid a political topic or political commentary or being too racy or being too contentious, Sugarcane was like, nope, we're going there. And I'm so
Hmm.
glad they did. I'm so glad they
Hmm.
did. But Lisa, were there other ones that really caught your attention as well? Because there was a lot, and I'm grateful that there's so much to talk about with the Oscars because there's been years where it wasn't a whole lot of women, people of color to talk about, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
this year was a good year.
so Sugarcane didn't actually end up winning, but what did win was a documentary called No Other Land that was written and directed by
Mhm.
um, four people who are collectively from Israel and Palestine. So I'm not sure how it breaks
Mhm.
down in terms of the four, but it is
Mhm.
a documentary about the experience of living in the West Bank, following a family that actually did happen, got pushed off of their land to make way for an Israeli tank training site, I believe. And so what's interesting about this documentary is that it has not found a US distributor. So they have self distributed it. And I looked online. I had heard about this film and I'd looked online yesterday to see if I could go watch it. And it was playing at one movie theater today at 3:30 p.m. in Denver, in the Hall of Denver. And so I am hoping their Oscar win for Best Documentary will lead a distributor to take it. And my assumption is a distributor is not taking it, despite its Oscar win, despite its critical acclaim, because of the fact that
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
telling a story that, much like the sugarcane, um,
Mhm.
the folks who are central to the sugarcane story, their story is also not being told, that this is true for
Yes.
Palestinians as well. And what
Yes.
I loved about it was that it was a joint venture by Israelis and Palestinians, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was
That's
really
right.
a really important piece of it. And then I also wanted to flag that Zoe Saldana won Best Supporting, or
Yes.
I don't think it's Best Supporting Actress. I think it's like woman in a supporting role, maybe is what it got changed
Mm-hmm.
to. I forget exactly,
Mm-hmm.
but she is the first Dominican Republic American.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can't remember how she identified, of Dominican Republic descent, I think is what she said. And
Oh, okay.
and
Mm-hmm.
she is the first person of Dominican Republic descent to ever win an Oscar, like at all, not
Mm-hmm.
just in that category, just at all.
Just at all. Mm-hmm.
And then I think
Mm-hmm.
what's also interesting about her win is that the film was a French film, but it was in Spanish. And she
Mm-hmm.
wins an
Mm-hmm.
Oscar for it. So that kind of
Yes. Yes.
collectively, I thought was really cool to see that happen. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then I will
Yeah.
also just throw in here another thing I thought was good was that same movie won Best Original Song for a song called
Yes.
El Mal, and it was a song in Spanish. And I just took great
Yes.
happiness in a Spanish song winning, a few days after our current
Mm.
president declared that English
Exactly.
was the official language of the United States. So,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Once again, another empty executive order coming across the desk there where it's like, really? And what really was interesting to me, the people that were laughing at that executive order was saying, wait a minute, we have people who not only is English their first language, English is their only language, and they still don't know the difference between there, and there. So what are we doing
Yeah,
here?
right.
We're just solidifying our ignorance here. And I'm included in those people that don't know more than one language. But yeah, I think that was powerful. And Zoe got to both act and sing in Spanish, which I think was just powerful that you get an opportunity to do that. Because I'm
Mm-hmm.
imagining, if you have a native tongue that you very rarely get to flex in your craft, I'm like, that seems like
Mm-hmm.
an empty space and place in your craft, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So I'm so
Mm-hmm.
glad she was able to do that. Um, and then, I think what was fascinating too, I cannot avoid an opportunity to highlight a few people, Paula Poundstone, that said there's something about the Oscars show that reeks of fear. There's nothing about it so far that speaks to where we are. There's a boot about to crush us, and this Oscar presentation doesn't guide us to look up. And so, with that, I think I'm grateful that even through the comedy, there are folks that are still willing
Mm-hmm.
to critique and not let the Oscars, quote unquote, off the hook, with their ongoing need to continue to have representation across the board. And then one other thing, which was just a load of fun. I mean, who can overlook Coleman Domingo in a bright
Mm.
red tuxedo leading the entire crowd with Before I Let Go, which is like an African American staple song that you just must, when you gather, play that song. I just thought a lot of things that were nuanced and powerful that we should name. Even with Coleman, he mentioned that the selection of his tuxedo, the color, was kind of a nod to all those folks that have given him his quote unquote roses
Mm.
or flowers in an Oscar setting, and just kind of naming that as an actor himself who, Lisa, you and I have brought up on this podcast, that's was incredible in a number of different roles in Sing Sing, and then also in Rustin, playing Bayard Rustin. So just lots of good stuff to talk about this year. But
Yeah.
a
I
hundred
yeah.
years of exclusion is not going to be erased with a couple of good years. Let me put it that way. Just not.
No,
Oh,
no, it's really not. And the number of women is still very low in terms
oh,
of
yes, 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 yes.
those big
Mm-hmm.
categories like director and best film. And I was looking this up, and so
Mm-hmm.
there's only been 10 women nominated in the best director category, but one of those women was nominated twice. So it's really only 9,
9.
and
Mm-hmm.
only 3 have ever won in that 100 years. And so that was
Mm.
Catherine Bigelow, Hurt Locker 2009, Chloe
Mm-hmm.
Zhao, Nomadland 2020, and then Jane Campion, who was the woman who was nominated twice. She won for Power of the
Mm-hmm.
Dog in 2021. But
Mm-hmm.
in 2020, there were 2 women nominated in that Best Director category, and that's when Chloe Zhao won for Nomadland.
Mm-hmm.
But that is like, that's just, I mean, that's just one identity characteristic, right? But we're so slow, to your point, not being erased. I mean, the
Yeah,
one thing,
yeah.
the one, I guess, last thing I wanted to say about it, what I thought was interesting, and it's related to that Paula Poundstone quote that you read, is that the Oscars is often a place where the folks who win are overtly political in making statements about what is
Yes.
happening in our world and in our culture. And
Yes.
I found that to be noticeably absent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that culture of fear that Paula Poundstone and others have been referencing was really palatable, in
Mm-hmm.
that there were
Mm-hmm.
only a few comments. One, Conan O'Brien made a joke, Daryl Hannah,
Mm-hmm.
Adrian Brody, kind of, but not really. And then
Right,
the
right.
2 of the directors of that Palestinian Israeli documentary. But other than that,
Mm. Well, Lisa, I love where you're going with that, because part of me wondered if it was fear or if it was exhaustion. And part of
yeah.
that is because maybe I'm a little more kind of sensitive in this area, because here in the DMV area, obviously we've seen on the news the ridiculous takeover of the Kennedy Center, and more and more and
Mm-hmm,
more
mm-hmm,
artists pulling their events from actually being having the Kennedy Center as a venue. The arts has always been a safe haven for those who have been othered.
mm-hmm,
Black folks, brown folks, Native American folks, LGBT folks. The All of those folks have sought out the arts as a safe haven. I even see it with Trey and his musicals and everything that he does that's connected with all the different angles of art. Those are where the kids that don't fit in anywhere else go as the safe haven. And so those kids eventually grow up and hopefully get Oscars and perform at the
mm-hmm.
Kennedy Center and so forth. And so, once you get to a place where not only your profession, but your art and your being are all being attacked at the same
Yeah.
time. Yeah, I will say, yeah, it probably is some fear, but also too, I'm thinking the amount of exhaustion that it takes. I'm like, oh my goodness, like some of my favorites, including a very large African American church here in the area that has held an event at the Kennedy Center for the last 30 years, has pulled out because they're not putting up with the bullshit of the takeover of the Kennedy Center. And so, at one point, At what point do you say, yeah, I might be afraid, but I'm also tired. And so I'm going to go places where I'm celebrated. I don't know. Maybe it was a mixture of both here at the Oscars this year. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know.
think that argument has more traction with people who are not white straight men, and there are plenty of those at the
Oh,
Oscars,
yes, yes, yes.
you
Hmm.
know? And I just
Absolutely.
feel like there is a
Absolutely.
platform, and particularly given your point that the arts are under attack, particularly because of that. The
Hmm.
folks who have most power in the room, why didn't you say something? You had an audience, a global audience,
Global audience. Yes,
and
yes,
you
yes.
could have, and I don't know.
And
So
you
anyway,
didn't.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
You didn't. Yep. So. All right. Well, look, I thoroughly enjoyed it, not including the fashion statements that were going on. I won't even get into that. That might be a whole nother podcast. But, I enjoyed seeing this because, Lisa, one day when we quote unquote officially retire from all the DEI work we're doing, one day we're going to teach some course that's based on nothing but musicals and movies and all the visual arts. We're just going to have fun with it at this point. So anyway, super proud of those folks that walked away with hardware and even more proud of those that didn't, knowing that they had a platform to make sure that people knew about their art and the
Hmm,
lived
hmm.
experiences of folks that usually don't get highlighted. So wonderful for y'all. So, all right, let's get into phase two.
All right. Okay, so this is a little bit of a hard right or a hard left, I guess. Going from Hollywood and glamour and glitz to shocking, disgusting, embarrassing, shameful,
Mortifying.
heartbreaking, mortifying. Yeah, all of the adjectives, right? So folks maybe calling to mind what I'm talking about here. So last Friday, Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine came to the White House and with the intention of signing a agreement related to mineral rights in Ukraine that was really not that beneficial to Ukraine, but would have appeased our current president. And it ended up devolving into what some have described as a shouting match, but I don't really feel like that's an appropriate label for it because that implies kind of 50-50. And I really feel like it was the president and the vice president ganging up on this man who has been trying desperately for 3 years to save his country, to garner support and financial and military and otherwise for the Ukraine to prevent the advancement of a known aggressor and dictator that invaded his country in 2014 originally, and then again in 2022. And we just passed the 3-year anniversary of that. And I actually haven't been able to watch the entire segment because it is so I mean, other than
Disgusting.
the
Sick.
words that it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and the other thing I think I saw someone talk about this, that Zelensky is being gaslit, right? And we've talked about gaslighting on this podcast, right? Where you're trying to, you're telling someone they're wrong or they're not seeing the things or they're not doing the things or they're not experiencing the things when they actually are, but you're doing that to have them create self-doubt, right? And so I think there's a lot of that happening here with President Trump saying, Zelensky's a dictator. Zelensky or Ukraine started the war, right? Zelensky, you're getting in the way. It's going to be your fault if World War III happens, right? So this victim blaming attitude. And it just feels so abhorrent to me to attack an ally who has
Yes.
really shown such strength and
Hmm.
resilience in the face of what he and his country people are experiencing. um it just shows how small our current administration is, and it's pretty
Yes, yes.
despicable. And I don't know, Shauna, what your thoughts are of it. I mean, there was I just
Yeah.
wanted, I felt like we had to talk about it because when we think about diversity and
Sick.
inclusion and we think about treating people with dignity and respect and not being a bully and recognizing the fullness and the humanity of each person. This was
Mm-hmm.
just not an example of that at all from our leader, right?
Mm. No, no, no. Let me be clear. Not my leader, maybe the leader of this country, but there has
Okay,
not been
fair.
one
Yep.
earthly thing that he has done to demonstrate leadership. Not at all. So,
Mm-hmm.
I said, I posted on my page on my social media in particular, something to the effect of as soon as we think we've gotten to the lowest of the low, we find another opportunity to go lower.
Yep. Yep.
And I've shared with y'all before that my parents are retired, so all they have to do really is share with me what's going on in the world. And so when I got I got a call from them and we were talking about something else, and usually as soon as I think I'm getting off the phone call and wrapping it up, then my parents bring up something big that happened on the news. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll get ready to talk to you all later. And then my dad chimes in, and did you see how y'all's president
Oh.
talked to President Zelensky's dog? I was like, what? And that's how I even found out
Mm-hmm.
that it happened.
Okay.
And so, I went, so of course, here we go with let me go and find it. So I went and found it, and I was more than mortified. Like I felt like I was sliced in half, where one half of me was, of course he's going to behave this way.
Right.
The other half of me was like, as an American, I'm mortified to
Yeah.
think that this is a representation to
Yep.
other countries of who we think we are.
Yep.
I'm like, no way. And so, it's if you've never in your life felt like you've been misrepresented, this is a time to feel misrepresented as an American
Mm.
citizen. I felt
Yeah, great point.
misrepresented. And so, again, this is another situation where I sit particularly, I have to say, I experienced in K through 12 bullying. Now, we may not have had the language to describe it as we do now, but if you're
Mm-hmm.
going off of the examples that are deemed bullying now, yes, I absolutely experienced that as a kid or K through 12 here. I've experienced bullying in other personal situations. I've experienced bullying in the workplace. And I'm also secondhand experiencing bullying with my kids. And everything that one would teach a young person to not do,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everything that you would teach someone on a job to not do and or consider retaliation, this was a perfect example of everything not to do by
Yep.
definition.
Yep.
Because when you think about bullying, you think about number one, aggression, the amount of times that he was spoken over. More than one person was speaking to him at one time in the midst of President Zelensky grappling through a language that is not his native tongue to begin with, right? Because I'm thinking about, Lisa, I know you've done this before, or at least been aware of this. If you have a student in your classroom
Mm-hmm.
that or they've shared with you that English is not their first language, you're not going to rush them to complete their sentence. You're not going to talk over them while they're
Right.
trying to
Right.
literally mentally process through more than one language to get their thought across. That's aggressive. So that's one piece. The power imbalance, which was very clear.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then how it kept happening over and over and over again, where it was happening with JD Vance, it was happening with this fool. And then it also happened with Brian Glenn being extremely aggressive and trying to flex power as it relates to his presentation, Zelensky's physical presentation of his attire. I'm sorry, but that feels like a kid walking home from school getting jumped by three bullies. That's what I feel like we saw in the
Mm-hmm.
Oval Office in that moment. It was very sickening. It went on for 10 minutes or so. And that last little jab at the end, I'm thinking to myself, I know y'all did not have that president fly all the way over here for y'all to jump him like that. Because I'm the kid that jumps in the fight to fight the bully.
Mm-hmm.
The number of days, and y'all can check the record, the number of days that I was either in in school suspension or whatever from school because I took up for someone else. My children have taken up for other people. No, I felt like I was watching a kid get jumped in the street. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
He didn't have anyone. He didn't have anyone there. No one stood up for
no,
him.
no, he had
No.
no one. And, that's where, the quote unquote respect for the Oval Office, I'm just thinking to myself, no, you wanted a president to bow to you and be
Yeah.
subservient to you. And when he wouldn't do it, that was a problem.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I think it was textbook bullying, Lisa, and it just the steam was coming out of my ears as I was watching the whole thing, frankly.
Yeah, so that Brian Glenn guy is actually a journalist from a very right-wing news
Mm,
organization who was given a
mm-hmm.
pass in addition to CNN as for a TV pass, which I guess doesn't happen very often that a second TV station, which is
Yeah,
probably not really an accurate representation of what this guy is. But
yeah, yeah.
you also told me that he's Marjorie Taylor Greene's partner, and so she's that really like off the wall, super,
Mm-hmm.
super Christian national conservative legislator from um,
Mm-hmm.
Georgia. And so, Trump, when Zelensky first got there, made some derogatory comment about his outfit. And then this is what
Yeah.
Brian Glenn asked, another comment that was pretty dismissive and rude. But
Yes.
tell everyone about the meme that you sent me today,
Oh
Shauna,
my
about
goodness.
not caring about what Zelensky's wearing.
It was it was so good, y'all, because the internet is undefeated, as we all know. It is undefeated on all of these. And what tickled me so was that it was a photo that I sent to Lisa, especially with her being from the UK. I sent this to Lisa. It's a photo of uh, King Charles talking with President Zelensky. And the caption says underneath, Marge Taylor Greene's boyfriend and a failed New York City casino boss thought Zelensky's outfit was disrespectful of their royal majesties. Guess who doesn't have a problem with Zelensky's clothes? The fucking King of England doesn't have a problem with it. So it just cracked me up that people
Yeah.
were pulling the dots together around it seemed quite clear to me that yes, we know the history of Britain and we get that. And at the same time, King Charles was clearly understanding with empathy that President Zelensky is in the middle of a war, quite
Right.
literally. And so what he's wearing is irrelevant. My dad said, I don't care if he showed up in a tuxedo with a top hat. He's still fighting a war.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how is his clothing relevant to the conversation of making sure that the war is ended and they begin the rebuilding process, which will take decades? Irrelevant, but that's what bullies do. Bullies pick
Yeah.
on the irrelevant in order to change the power dynamic. And Zelensky did
Mm-hmm.
not bow down to them. And I'm thrilled that he didn't bow down to them
Yeah.
because so
Yeah.
many people are.
Yeah. Me too. I was actually pretty proud. I guess I don't know him, but I was like, good for you for
Yeah.
not just bending your knee because everyone else, and that is essentially what the expectation is you're going to get my help as the president of the United States because I'm apparently the only one who has the power to do that. But to
Uh-huh.
do that, you have to bend a knee and you have to kiss the ring. And I'm really glad that he didn't do that. I mean, he's in a very, he and his people are in an absolutely
Horrific. Oof.
awful, horrific position. And the
Mm-hmm.
US, like it or not,
Mm-hmm.
has been a big ally and has been one of the primary reasons, along with Europe, as to why they have been able to sustain
Yes.
for as long as they have. And so
Yes.
it is just
Yeah.
devastating to
Yeah.
think how this could end up. And what, really pissed me off, especially was when JD Vance was talking about
Mm-hmm.
not saying thank you. Every time I have heard Zelensky speak publicly, whether it's in Europe or here, he always says thank you to the American people or the European people or whatever. Like,
That's
and I
right.
think he actually said thank you right at the beginning of the meeting.
He
And then
did. He did.
JD Vance asks him to say thankful and saying, you're ungrateful. And the two men that are sitting there harassing him both don't give two shits about Ukraine. And JD Vance is on record as saying he doesn't care about what happens in Ukraine. And
That's
obviously,
right.
Trump doesn't give a shit about what happens in Ukraine because he's just more interested in his friendship with Putin because
Yeah,
he
crony.
and
Yep.
Putin went through so much with the Russia investigation, right?
Well,
Like they're
and that's
buddy
why
buddy.
exactly. And that's why, frankly, when I saw the video, when I watched the video, I was surprised that JD Vance was even there because of his prior disinterest in what was going on with Ukraine. So when I saw him there, I'm thinking, okay, clearly it's the main bully, 45, 47. And then you got a side bully that really doesn't care about you, but hey, I just take it for sport to beat people up. So I showed up. Like, what? You've been on record not caring about Ukraine and the outcomes of any of this. And so, to turn the tables, given that 45, 47 had already called Zelensky a dictator in the past, making this empty claim that Ukraine started the war, you can't tell me that all of these behaviors aren't bullying. Trying to convince folks of something they clearly know isn't true? No.
Yeah, I mean, they don't care whether or not they identify it as bullying. I mean, for you and I, it matters, but I don't give they don't care at all
No, no,
whether
no.
they
That's
are. And
their
yeah,
MO. Bullying is their
right.
language.
Because that's strength, right? That conveys strength in
That's
their
it. That's
imagination.
it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, I mean, we could talk about this for
Yep.
a lot because it's just obviously very angering to both Sean and I, but let's wrap it up here and
Yeah.
move into our next phase 3.
All right, so phase 3. So we talked a little bit about our military and specifically with our transgender siblings, but this one particularly hits home in that we now know that the military is going to begin removing trans service members, identifying them, and then beginning what are being dubbed as separation proceedings. Separation proceedings. So, Lisa, when I started looking at some of the language around this quote unquote separation proceedings, it
Mm-hmm.
very much reminds me of the previous lavender scare. So, folks that have not heard of the lavender scare in government work, go back, do a little bit of homework and research on the lavender scare in particular,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where it wasn't military specific, but it was just across the board federally. Let's root out and remove LGBT folks that were working in the federal workplace. Same stuff, different day here, except we're focusing on military. There are about 15,000 service members and 4,200 active service members who identify as trans, which is, I feel like a drum roll needs to happen here, which is 0.4%
Yeah,
of
tiny.
our active service members. So we're not talking about 40, 50, 60%. We are talking about the minute of the minute percentage of service members. Fascinating, Lisa, when from what I recall, every branch of the armed services right now, they have a shortage of folks.
Yep,
They're having
sure
a
do.
hard time recruiting
Yep.
people. And so the fact that you're saying that, I mean, I see recruiters all the time. Help me, help me understand how you have folks that are willing to serve our country, but because you have transphobic illness, that's what I'm calling it, this illness to make you think that these individuals are ill-equipped or threaten the security of this country is mind-blowing, mind-blowing. And so, it goes
Mm-hmm.
back, in my opinion, it goes back to, gosh, which DSM was it? DSM 45 or so, but it's been a while, but all the way, it's rolling back several versions of the DSM to go back to gender dysphoria. And that to me, again, I feel like with the stroke of a pen, with a few strikes of the keyboard, here we go, obliterating decades of equity work for people in the LGBT
Mm-hmm.
communities and people in service. As you know, Lisa, I have lots of people around me and close to me that are either active, retired, veterans, and
Mm-hmm.
even folks that have been in the reserves. And they do not understand how this is relevant to the security
Right.
of our country. So don't take
Yeah.
it from me, take it from folks around me that are saying, no, 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 let's be very clear. This should not be a problem. And what really got me, especially for myself, now that this probably will fall along gender lines, this was one of my first concerns when 45, 47 got reelected, was that I literally started counting the years as to when he would be out of office,
Mm-hmm.
and Trey, my oldest, would be 18, for fear of the draft.
Yeah.
Because at some point, the quote unquote only rationale will be, oh, well, now we're going to have to draft people to be in the US military. When we had people that were willing to serve, but because of your transphobia, you've decided that your fear is more important than treating an individual as a human being that's willing to make the ultimate sacrifices that you, 45, and others in your cabinet are unwilling to do.
Right. Right. Yep. Right on there.
Cowards.
Right.
Cowardly.
Yeah,
Cowardly.
it is. It is. And this one will include the link to the policies because it's public, because it was made public through a court case challenging one of the executive orders related to this. But it says military service by service members and applicants for military service who have a current diagnosis or history of or exhibit symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria is incompatible with military service. Service by these individuals is not in the best interests of the military services and is not clearly consistent with the interests of national security. So, to your point, right, one's gender identity has nothing to do with whether or not you are a national security risk. And if you're in a combat
Yes,
unit
yes, yes.
and you're out there in combat, your gender identity is in that moment meaningless, whether you have the back or not of the person that's in your group. I mean, that's not military language, but the people that you're there with.
Right.
And
Right.
so it's
Right.
just, it's so, and this policy is so cruel and so like nitpicky as well, like requiring that you have to say sir or ma'am based on someone's assigned sex at birth. Like and the assumption that that's obvious without, looking, and just, yeah, all predicated on
Mm-hmm.
a faulty a faulty belief that there are only two sexes to begin with and that sex and gender are the same thing. um
Unreal. Unreal.
and it just, yeah, so it's so awful.
Mm-hmm.
It's so awful to think about, and it's this other way, right? Like, we have to blame a group of people. Doesn't matter how big that group of people is, but if we can find a scapegoat, if we can find a group of people to hate,
That's
and then
it. That's it.
legislate that hate, whether it's immigrants or trans people,
That's it.
then
Yes,
that is
yes,
where all
yes.
the vitriol can go, right? And all that does is
Mm-hmm.
maintain, you know, heterosexism, patriarchal ways, white supremacy, because we're funneling all of the problems to the feet of these individuals who are the least
Yes.
represented, the most marginalized,
Yes,
that
yes,
have the
yes.
smallest number of people. They do not have a political voice. They do not have access to vote
Mm-hmm.
in numbers that are meaningful, right? In the same way that white
Mm-hmm.
people do. They do not
Yeah.
have a lot of money, but let's go ahead and target them. And you know, I
Yeah.
I
Yep.
just, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know how people have so much hate in their
Mm-hmm.
heart that they look at this and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. That's good. Let's just erase a whole group of people. And also, while we're at it, let's get rid of them from
Mm-hmm.
the military when the military is struggling and these people are willing to lay down their life for our country. But whatever.
That's right. That's right. That's
Um,
right. That's right. Well, I'll do my best, Lisa, to also put in the show notes. There's a link to a New York Times article that talks about, the title of it is "Meet the Trans Troops That the Trump Administration is Barring." And it gives the real stories of those individuals and how they have served our country honorably. That, for example, Commander Emily Schilling, who is a decorated Navy fighter pilot. Also, Sergeant First Class Julia B. Craft, who was offered a very flexible schedule and so forth when they were transitioning, and then later returned to leading soldiers. Now is probably going to be separated from the military, obviously. Um, and even the people, for example, there was one in particular, Paolo Bautista, who already had, obviously being a Latino male, that talked about a number of different oppressions, but specifically saying, frankly, people don't know unless I tell them. And
Right.
so
Right.
now we're back to don't ask, don't tell,
Yeah.
reminders. So, oh, this group has already been so invisible. And
Hmm.
so, going back to some of our analogies around the bullying piece of things too, again, it's like, it feels like the biggest, strongest bully always picks on the smallest, frailest
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah. It
That's what
does
this,
feel
as
that.
far as numbers and percentages, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that the trans community is frail. What I am saying is you're very strong, but it's almost like you're being outnumbered on every front. Every front.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, targeted in a
Yes.
way that there is awareness of
Mm-hmm.
the trans community's kind of lack of access to resources and political power. I mean, there are some amazing organizations that are pushing
Mm-hmm.
lawsuits, and one of those lawsuits did yield something last week. A federal judge, did strike down, or at least did a preliminary injunction on a few components of a couple of the executive orders relating to gender,
Mm-hmm.
not the military one, unfortunately, but the ban on gender affirming care for folks who are under 19, the removal of all gender ideology language from statements, policies, etc., and
Mm-hmm.
then the use of federal funds to promote quote unquote gender ideology, which is the kind of term that they're using.
Mm-hmm.
Those three
Mm-hmm.
components of those executive orders have been prohibited from being put into action. So
Mm-hmm.
it's only a limited order for a few states, but it's something,
Yeah.
right? It's something.
Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
are people fighting. But when you
Mm-hmm.
talk, I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
the wall of power, I mean, I can understand it feels insurmountable. And so this is where I guess allies are
Mhm.
important, right?
Oh,
This
yeah.
is how um, cisgender people, heterosexual people, folks who are not directly impacted, regardless of their gender identity, this is where allyship, because at 0.4% of the military,
Mm-hmm.
you I think there's reason to for us to be louder, right? For allies to be
Oh.
louder.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Lisa, just to give you another little update too, a article that was just published 3 days ago in the New York Times says that that percentage is even smaller. They're saying now that
Mm,
it's from the 2021 report of 0.4% is down to 0.2%. So again, the big, you know, Goliath trying to beat up the little David. I'm like, I'm not okay with that. I'm just not.
yeah, and I feel like this is making me think of, like, I can't remember where I read this, but some sentiment to the effect of, you would think that the trans community is like 70% of the US population, with the volume of
Yes, yes,
prohibitions and discussion both in the campaign and now around
yes,
it, right?
yes,
And so
yes.
we're focusing on this issue, which is cruel and dehumanizing, but what about the price of
Mm.
groceries, right? What about the fact that there are
What about
these
the eggs?
yeah, humanitarian issues in the world? What about the fact that we have climate change, right? Like these issues that are affecting far more people are not being addressed, yet we're going to harass and demean um a, a group of people who are already super vulnerable and are just trying to
Mm,
live their authentic lives. Like, it's so
hmm.
twisted. It's so twisted.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It's very twisted, and as much as I continue to keep that, flicker of hope that we always talk about,
Yeah.
I'm grateful that you and I, Lisa, can't and probably never will understand fully the depths of the hate that we're seeing.
Right.
Like I never want, like when people walk around saying, I don't understand how, no, I don't understand, and I don't want to understand. Because once
Mm-hmm.
I get to the point that I do understand, then this shit will start making sense in ways that I don't want it to make sense. I don't want
Yeah.
inhumanity to make sense to me. Ever.
Right. Right.
I don't want it to make sense to me. So, I've even, talked to certain friends and so forth that have been very politically vocal, and even to the point of there are folks that literally would not spit on that man if he were on fire, but they have never wished ill will on him other than for him to just simply get out of the Oval Office. That's a level of humanity that I don't see from other people in the direction of those who
Yeah.
are fighting towards humanity. There is a line of humanity that some folks are willing to stomp on and other people still aren't willing to touch. And I just don't want to understand the people that are willing to stomp on it.
Yeah, I
I'm not
know.
okay with it. Not okay
Right.
with it.
It's not a good look.
No, not at
That's
all.
that's an understatement. So,
Not at
all
all.
right.
Exactly. So, see, now you all see why we did not have time for a word of the week because we had so much to get through, that we wanted to make sure that you heard some of these recent
Mm-hmm.
goings on in our U.S. context here. But
Yeah.
we will give you plenty of show notes to lead you to further articles and information
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
all three of the phases. But Lisa, let me tell folks where to find us. Of course, you probably found us on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. Continue to follow, subscribe us there. Also, too, you can find us on Instagram at Unfazed Pod, LinkedIn at Unfazed Pod, or of course, if there were any terms or any topics, theories that we brought up tonight that you would want us to help clarify, email us at info@unfazedpodcast.com. And of course, we have our website where you can find all the things related to Unfazed Podcast. Find us there, unfazedpodcast.com, with old and new shows. So if you liked what you heard today, please like, subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So, Dr. Lisa, until next time.
Yeah. Hang in there, everyone.